I would say by far I grew the most this semester as a science educator for very many reasons. Partly because of my wonderful classroom mentor, Mrs. Bryson, who happens to be very passionate about science, and I think over the course of the semester she transferred some of that passion to myself. So when it came to approaching my term 3 lesson, I really wanted to try and incorporate as much of our class as possible. So the very first thing I thought about was that initial pyramid that we discussed and trying to lay the foundation in the lesson so that the students could do a variety of things within my skateboarding lesson, besides skateboarding, of course. My general weakness with science in the beginning, I think, was mostly just being able to handle the content. I didn't feel confident that I could adequately deliver the science content and conduct science experiments and do science activities with the students. But over the course of the semester and having different discussions and doing different activities in class, I realized all of the endless possibilities, as well as the profound connections between science literacy and science and math, of course, that can help to make science not only science, but can integrate it with other subjects. So in terms of my lesson, I wanted to definitely incorporate as many things as possible, even the little things. I knew that I wanted the students to observe something in my lesson. I wanted them to observe each other. I wanted them to observe their skateboarding. I wanted them to think about skateboarding in general, why you can skateboard over some surfaces and not others, and how does a vert ramp change that? How is a rolling hill compared to a vert ramp? What are their two shapes? For me, it was very important that there be some type of measuring involved in this lesson. I wanted to have them measure the amount of time it took for a skateboarder to go across a predetermined length. I also wanted them to work with numbers. I'm very interested in the connection between science and math. As I think about my integrated unit, I definitely want to have a heavy math component within the science. And I think that was a strength within the lesson. I later did interviews with some of the students who did the science lesson, and there was one student who definitely confirmed that this was a strength because he is definitely a math student, but he also happens to really enjoy skateboarding. His dad owns one of the local skateboard shops that the kids all go to, and one thing that he said in his interview was that he really enjoyed the math part of the lesson. So I definitely met that goal in terms of not only hitting on the math in the science lesson, but making it engaging and interesting those students who like math as well as science, and he happens to like both math and science. So I would definitely say that a strength that I have gained over the course of the semester, and specifically in this lesson, is integrating math successfully into my lesson without it encumbering the rest of the lesson or somehow taking over the science. It was really important for me to have them think about using space, using those time relationships. I was very specific about the length of the skateboarding path in the lesson. I didn't want it to be too long. I wanted it to be long enough for them to get an accurate trial and to get a time. I wanted them to use seconds, because of course I knew that the seconds related to the equations they would be doing for velocity and momentum, it would be easiest for them to use seconds. And I also wanted them to do some inferencing even before we did the trials, as well as throughout the lesson. I wanted them to infer whether or not they thought velocity and momentum were connected in some way, if they were related. That was something that they all definitely discussed in the initial discussion before we even went outside. They were able to infer that there was some type of relationship between velocity and momentum, but that they wanted to find out during the course of the lesson what that relationship was, which definitely led me to having them predict what was going to happen during the course of the lesson. That was something that Mrs. Bryson wrote in her notes, that I should definitely incorporate into my science lesson, some type of prediction element. So for me, having them predict possibly what that relationship between velocity and momentum could be, as well as what they thought would affect the speed of the skateboarders. I think was really interesting, and our initial discussion was definitely one of my favorite parts of the lesson, because they were all already thinking about skateboarding because they love skateboarding, but this lesson definitely showed them those physical science components of skateboarding, which in turn led to them definitely communicating to each other before, during, and after the lesson. They communicated their ideas very clearly during the final discussion, after they had made their calculations and after they had had a chance to go back and look at the trials and to try to do some of the computations in order to reach some of these answers. And in order to do those computations, it was definitely necessary that they have some type of operational definition of velocity and momentum. That's why in the pre-assessment before we did the trial, something I wanted them to do was to have some type of operating definition of velocity and momentum. Therefore, I created the slideshow as a way to guide them through the lesson. And this is another point of growth for me during the course of the semester. I think at the beginning of the semester, I was very, very nervous about doing a science lesson because I was nervous about how I was going to present it. I think that I have begun to develop a strength for not only being able to organize the lesson and organize different parts of the lesson so that it makes sense, but to create visuals and to create other media, other components to also help guide the lesson as well. And this lesson made it very easy for them to interpret their data. They had data from the very beginning. The first thing they did after our introduction and after the pre-assessment was they collected data. And I think by giving them different jobs, that helped them each focus on their particular part of the lesson. That was one area where I'm still developing in terms of my teaching, is how to facilitate a group lesson where you've already given the students jobs, but maybe one student really, really wants that other job within the lesson, or maybe you have another student who really, really wants to skateboard. This particular day when I did the lesson, I did go ahead and have a fourth skateboarder in the lesson because I could see that there could be a little bit of a conflict. That was a call that I made during the course of the lesson. Later, looking back on it, I'm still ambivalent towards that decision because I think that it definitely it changed my worksheet. It made the worksheet a little more confusing. The worksheet was set up to have only 3 trials. By adding that 4th trial, it then created another set of work, another computation that the students had to complete. But I also wanted that student to have a chance to do what he really wanted to do within the lesson, so I went ahead and have him do it. And the most interesting part of the lesson as well was at the end, when we went back to that slideshow, we went back to their pre-assessment and then did a post-assessment after they did their computation of velocity and momentum. So I really think that over the course of this semester, I've really tried to think more clearly about the organization of my science lessons, and some of the activities that we did in class and the things that we discussed in class definitely helped me to think about how I wanted to approach teaching science. Definitely, I think if I could do this particular lesson again, I would break it up. I would actually make a unit. I probably would spend 1 or 2 days specifically on velocity and then momentum, and then possibly add in another component of the topographic maps, which I know that was something that Mike did that I really, really enjoyed. So there are many other things I feel that I could do with this lesson, but I think that this particular lesson and our science methods class in general is one area where I've really grown, and I definitely feel more confident into 24.